Viola. Hi, I'd like to tell you a folk tale that I call Thorns vs. Spines. Folk tales are simple stories that have been told and retold, passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation. They unify people. Often when you listen to a folk tale, you'll know where it comes from. At the end of this story, I'll tell you what part of the world it started in. There was in a place which you may or may not have visited, a very lovely garden. It was filled with examples of each and every plant that grew in that part of the world. The garden was well taken care of and was a pleasure to visit. Most of the plants were grateful to be there and lived together in happy harmony. There was only one flower that seemed always to be in a bad temper, and by coincidence, this flower was considered by herself and by all of the others to be the prettiest of them all. She was an enormous red rose. By an odd twist of fate, the garden had been designed to center around that beautiful red rose and a scruffy-looking cactus who was by her side. The red rose thought about this all day long and even had dreams about it at nighttime. This is so terrible. I'm a great beauty, and yet I have been planted here and have no way of getting out of the sight of the ugliest being imaginable. Ugh, that shiny green glob that's covered all over in spines. She was referring to the cactus, and in my opinion, she was being a bit harsh because her stem and limbs were, of course, covered in thorns. And I don't know about you, but while I don't like needles, I'm not any more partial to thorns. I don't think thorns are all that great. But the way each of us views ourselves is made up of a combination of factors, so who is to judge? In any event, the cactus who was right next to her heard the red rose's insults and complaints, but never said a thing. Just about the time when I learned about the proud rose and her neighbor, the cactus, the weather was showing her not very agreeable side. By this I mean, no rains had watered the flower garden for a very long time. She, as well as the other pretty but not so spectacular as the rose plants, started to wilt, and by that I mean that the edges of their leaves began to curl in and their general color faded. The amazing red rose was panic-stricken. Her head slumped forward and the volume of her petals decreased. She no longer had the strength nor the desire to spend her days complaining. Once her negative, self-centered thoughts diminished, she became more aware of the world around her. She saw that some small birds that she had never noticed before were flying into the garden. When she paid more careful attention, she realized that the little birds were getting very close to the cactus. This puzzled her, and she was surprised when a clump of pretty blue forget-me-nots at her feet said to a bright bunch of marigolds, "That cactus is our hero. Every time the temperatures rise and the earth dries out, when there's been no rain for weeks, he shares the water that he stored." It may have been because she was so weak from lack of moisture and that she could no longer hold her head up in a proud display. Whatever the reason, for the first time in her life, she began to feel that just having a pretty face did not make her the most important plant in the garden. She let out a low, sad moan. "I'm worn out and droopy and sad. The forget-me-nots, who were gregarious little things, heard her. We all feel a bit sad and droopy with the heat. You should ask the cactus for some water. But even as desperate as she felt, she was too proud and hopefully too embarrassed to ask the cactus for help. As it happened, it wasn't necessary for her to ask, because just as he had always heard all of her insults, he now heard her describe her desperation. There were several sparrows flying around him at that moment, and he asked each of them to take a few drops of his water to the rose. They were happy to help, and in a couple of minutes, or maybe half an hour at the most, the red rose had perked up and now was even more gorgeous than she had been before, because now she was able to see the beauty in others, which gives a special glow to any being who is beautiful on both the inside and the outside. This is a tale that is told in India.